In this lecture, we are going to learn about and work with raised buttons. I start Android Studio. I create a new project. And I name it, for example, button. And my project is saved inside the Material Design Projects folder. I click Next, and I set the minimum SDK to API 15 or Android 4. Next, empty activity, and next, and finally finish. I wait until Android Studio creates my project. Alright, my project was successfully created. I go to the resource section, and then inside the layout folder, I open the activity main layout. I go to the text section, and I get rid of these paddings created automatically by Android Studio. I remove context as well. This text view is also redundant, so I remove it too. And also tools, I can remove it. In order to learn about raised buttons, I'm going to define an AppCompat button, which is a button from the AppCompat library and has material features. I type android.support.v7.widget.appcompat button. Okay, now my AppCompat button requires a height and a width. In the preview section, I set its height and width to wrap content, which means equal to the size of the content. You see that our AppCompat button has been created under our toolbar. Now I define an ID for it, @ID /raised_btn. After ID, I type Android:\layout_center horizontal, and I set its value to true. You see that our AppCompat button is placed horizontally at the center of the screen. I also add a top margin to my AppCompat button. I type Android:\layout_margin top. For its value, I type, for example, 24 dp. For this AppCompat button, I also add a text. For example, I type raised button. I hit Alt and return, extract string resource, and OK. I run my project on the emulator. Alright, our application was launched on the emulator. As you can see, we defined an AppCompat button below the toolbar and set its text to raised button. One of the differences of AppCompat buttons with normal buttons is that in AppCompat button, we have material features. For example, if I click on the button, you see that an effect shows the button has been selected. This way. Now I want to change the color for different parts of my button. I stop the emulator. Now I go to the values folder and I open the file colors.xml. Here I define a new color. I name it color raised button. And I close my color. For its value, I go to material colors and I select, for example, green, code 500. I select this color code, copy it, then I return to Android Studio and I paste the code inside color raised button. So we defined a new color named color raised button, which we want to use as the background color for our button. I also define another new color. I name it, for example, color raised button text. It became a bit long actually. I want the color of my button's label to be white. So I enter the code for the white color, sharp 6 Fs. So we defined two new colors, color raised button for our button's background color and color raised button text for the button's text color. Okay, I'm done with colors.xml. So I close this file and I go to the file styles.xml. Now I create a new style for my button. I open a style tag and I name it, for example, raised button. Now I set my styles parent to widget.appcompat.button.colored. And I close my style. Now inside the style, I'm going to create a new item. I type Android : background tint and I close the item. Now using this item, we can change our button's background color. For its value, I type @color / color raised button. I referenced my button's background color inside this item. You see that Android Studio shows an error on our item, saying that the item Android : background tint requires API level 21 or Android 5 Lollipop, while we have set the minimum SDK to API 15 or Android 4. To solve this problem, I remove the Android : section from my item. You see that the item's error is gone. After background tint, I'm going to define another item. I type Android : text color. And I close the item. Using this item, I can change the color of my button's label. For its value, I type @color / color raised button text. So we created a new style, and inside the style, we defined two items: background tint, which dealt with the button's background color, and Android : text color, which dealt with the color of the button's label. Okay, we're done with styles.xml. I close this file and return to the activity main layout. Inside my appcompat button and after text, I type style equals, I type my style's name, @style / raised button. You see that our button's appearance changed. The button's background color changed to green and its label became white. Alright, I run my project on the emulator to see how the app looks like. Okay, our application was launched, and as you can see, our button's background color changed to green and it's labeled to white. Once we have changed its color, I'm going to define a function for this raised button, which means I want to define an onClick listener event. I stop my emulator and close the activity main layout. I open the main activity class. Inside this class, I will define an object from the AppCompat button class. I name my object, for example, raised button and semicolon. Inside the onCreate method, I get the reference for my object. Raised button equals, I use casting to AppCompat button, then find view by ID. Inside the parentheses, I type r.id.raised_btn, and finally semicolon. Now I'm going to simply define a setOnClickListener method for my raised button object. So I type raised button dot setOnClickListener, and inside the parentheses I type new onClickListener. You see that the onClick method was added to our class. Every time we click on the raised button, the code inside the onClick method will be executed. And you can also type your desired code inside this method. To see whether our onClick method works correctly, I'm going to use a toast message. I type toast.makeText. Inside the parentheses, I enter several parameters. The first is context, so I use the method getApplicationContext. The next argument is a text. I enter the text for my toast message inside double quotes, raised button. I set the toast duration to toast.lengthShort, and finally I type .show. Now if we run this project on emulator, a toast message with the text raised button must be displayed as soon as we click on the button. Okay, I run the project on emulator. Alright, our application was launched on emulator. I click on the raised button and yes, as we expected, a toast message with the text raised button was displayed. Again, you can write your desired statements inside the onClick method. And that's it for raised buttons. In the next lecture, we will learn about flat buttons.